For 60 years, we've basically been told that 65% of ordinary people would happily shock a stranger to death.
Right, just because a guy in a lab coat told them to.
Exactly. We've been taught that we're fundamentally these, apathetic bystanders. That if someone is in trouble on a crowded street, we'll all just look the other way.
Yeah, it's this narrative that human nature, underneath it all, is inherently dark and mechanical.
And cruel, honestly. But what if you found out that the archival tapes, the unedited audio recordings, and the actual police records from these famous events prove that almost all of that was a complete fabrication?
It's wild because it completely upends how we view ourselves.
It really does.
When you actually dig into the original source material, the raw data before it was packaged for pop psychology textbooks, you find out that the humans involved were actually deeply rational and remarkably pro-social.
And that's exactly what we're going to gently unpack today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
I'm so glad you're here. And to you listening, whether you're joining us for the first time or if you've been with us for years, we invite you to just take a breath and settle in.
Yeah, get comfortable.
The mission of this deep dive is to pull back the curtain on our own psychology. We want to explore the hidden architecture of how we think, how we remember, and how we interact.
And importantly, we're going to dismantle some of those incredibly stress-inducing myths about human nature.
Because honestly, they cause a lot of unnecessary anxiety. Before we jump in, though, a quick favor to ask. If you're a fan of uncovering hidden truths, remember the phrase, decoding the dark.
That's sort of our guiding theme today.
It is. And please take a second to like and subscribe on whatever app you're using. It really helps this deep dive reach more curious minds, and it means the world to us.
So, to give you a bit of a roadmap for our journey today, we're going to start by looking inward.
Right, starting with the self.
Exactly. We need to explore the quiet, invisible ways our expectations shape our reality, and look at the massive blind spots we have in everyday decision-making.
It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. And once we understand our own minds, we'll transition to how we behave in groups. That's when we'll reevaluate those infamous, supposedly dark psychological experiments to find a much more comforting truth.
I love that. Let's start with those invisible forces shaping our individual reality. The sources highlight something called the Pygmalion effect.
Yes, the Pygmalion effect.
Now, I know the term comes from the Greek myth, right?
Mm-hmm.
The sculptor who falls in love with the statue he carved, and then it literally comes to life.
Right, Pygmalion in Galatea. But in psychology, it's referring to something much more grounded, but honestly just as powerful.
Okay, so what is it, practically speaking?
It's essentially the scientific framework for the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, okay.
The Pygmalion effect dictates that the expectations placed upon an individual can directly influence their actual performance.
So if I expect you to do well,
then my chances of doing well actually increase. If you believe someone is highly capable, your belief alters their environment in a way that causes them to become more capable.
and I'm guessing the reverse is true as well.
Sadly, yes. If you expect them to fail, you inadvertently pave the way for that exact failure.
The classic study for this, the sources mentioned, is Robert Rosenthal's experiment in the 1960s. And the setup is just fascinating.
It's a brilliant piece of experimental design.
So Rosenthal partnered with an elementary school principal, Lenore Jacobson. They went into this school at the start of the year and gave all the first and second graders this test.
Right, the Harvard test of inflected acquisition.
Which sounds incredibly intimidating for a first grader.
It sounds incredibly prestigious. And they told the teachers that this specific test could identify which children were about to experience a massive intellectual growth spurt.
Like an academic blooming.
Exactly. So they handed the teachers a list of these quote-unquote intellectual bloomers and said, you know, keep an eye on these kids. They are on the verge of greatness.
But the crucial piece of context here, which I love, is that the Harvard test of inflected acquisition didn't actually exist.
No, not at all. It was just a standard, very basic IQ test that they renamed to sound fancy.
Wow.
And Rosenthal didn't even use the test scores to pick the bloomers. He picked the names completely at random out of a hat.
So it's totally arbitrary.
Completely arbitrary. Their actual baseline intelligence had absolutely nothing to do with being on that list.
But the results at the end of the year were stunning, right?
They really were. The kids who were randomly labeled as bloomers showed a significantly greater increase in their IQ scores compared to the control group.
Just because the teachers thought they were smart.
Exactly. Which forces us to ask this really interesting mechanistic question. How does a completely fabricated expectation literally increase a child's cognitive performance.
Right, because we know it's not magic.
No, it's not telepathy. It happens in the micro-interactions.
What do you mean by micro-interactions? What does that actually look like in a classroom?
Well, they've tracked this in follow-up observational studies over the years. When a teacher believes a specific student has this untapped potential, their unconscious behavior toward that student shifts dramatically.
Can you give an example?
Sure. So a teacher will naturally give the, quote, gifted student more time to answer a question before jumping in to rescue them.
Oh, that makes sense. Because they assume the kid knows the answer and just needs a second.
Exactly. They also maintain warmer eye contact, and they offer more detailed, constructive feedback when the child makes a mistake.
Instead of just saying, no, that's wrong.
Right. They'll say something like, well, you're on the right track, but let's look at this part again. They actively create a warmer socio-emotional climate for that specific child.
And over the course of an entire school year, those tiny interactions compound.
Thousands of them, yeah. The child internalizes the belief that they are smart, they feel safer taking academic risks, they put in more effort, and their actual intelligence increases.
It's an incredible testament to how our beliefs about other people construct the reality they live in. It's actually a very soothing thought that we have that power to uplift people just by believing in them.
It is, yeah. But our reality isn't just shaped by external expectations.
Right.
It's heavily warped by what we choose to focus our own attention on at any given moment.
Which brings us to a quote from Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economist that the sources bring up. He said, "Nothing in life is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it."
Such a profound observation.
It really is. It stops you in your tracks.
That's the focusing effect. We have this profound cognitive bias where we place far too much importance on one specific aspect of an event, and we completely fail to account for the massive web of other factors.
Our brains are essentially spotlights.
That's a perfect analogy. Whatever is in the center of the beam seems like the whole world, and everything in the darkness just ceases to exist in our mental calculus.
The sources use this really interesting illusion regarding income and daily mood to illustrate it.
Oh, the income illusion.
Yeah. If you survey people and ask them to estimate the difference in daily mood between a very high income earner and a low income earner, people assume the difference is just staggering.
They assume the wealthy person is practically walking on sunshine every single day.
Right, and that the low-income person is perpetually miserable.
Now, to be clear, there is a difference. Financial security provides a massive buffer against stress.
Absolutely, we aren't dismissing that.
But the data shows that the actual difference in self-reported daily mood is about 1/3 less significant than people imagine it to be.
So why are our estimates so far off?
Because of that spotlight you mentioned. When you ask someone, how much happier is a rich person than a poor person, you force their brain to focus exclusively on the variable of money.
So we just tunnel vision on the money.
Right. You imagine the wealthy person driving a luxury car and the lower income person stressing over a utility bill.
Which happens, of course.
It happens, but what we forget is that on any given Tuesday afternoon, both of those people might have a terrible headache.
Or they might both be dealing with a rebellious teenager.
Exactly. Or they both might be enjoying a really perfect cup of coffee, or laughing at a joke a coworker told them.
We basically forget the baseline of human existence.
Precisely. The myriad of other daily circumstances, the weather, relationships, minor annoyances, health, they make up the bulk of our minute-to-minute mood.
But the factor of income overshadows everything else simply because it's the specific thing we are currently focusing on.
You see this all the time with embarrassment, too.
Oh my gosh, yes. Think about when you make a social faux pas. You trip and fall on a crowded sidewalk.
The worst feeling.
It really is. You get that flush of heat in your face, and you assume everyone in the area saw it, and you feel this burning humiliation that lasts for hours.
Because you're hyper-focusing on the trip.
Right, but in reality, everyone else is focusing on their own lives. Does knowing about the focusing effect actually do anything to help us feel less embarrassed in that moment?
Well, you can't really turn off the autonomic nervous system's response.
So I'm still gonna blush.
Yeah, you're going to feel that initial visceral wave of embarrassment, that spike in heart rate. We evolved as social creatures, so our standing in the tribe matters to our survival circuitry.
That makes sense.
But intellectually, knowing about the focusing effect acts as this critical, calming, cognitive intervention. Once that initial spike happens, you can catch yourself.
And say what?
You can say, I'm blowing this out of proportion because it's the only thing I'm thinking about right now. To that person over there, my falling down was a 2-second distraction from their anxiety about their mortgage.
That is so comforting. It allows you to downregulate your emotional response and recover much faster.
It's a great tool for self-soothing.
So if our reality is constantly being warped by our focus and by the expectations placed upon us, how much insight do we actually have into the deliberate, conscious choices we make every day?
Oh, this is where it gets a little spooky.
The sources dive into this concept of choice blindness. And honestly, the research they highlight from Lund University makes it seem like we don't know ourselves at all.
The work by Peter Johansson and Lars Hall is genuinely unsettling at first glance, because it challenges the most fundamental assumption we have about ourselves.
That we know why we do what we do.
Exactly.
Let me walk through the setup of their face swapping experiment,
Yeah.
because it sounds like close-up magic. It doesn't even sound like a psychology study.
It essentially is magic. They use literal sleight of hand.
Right. So the researchers sit a participant down and show them 2 photographs of different faces. And they simply ask, which of these 2 faces do you find more attractive?
A very mundane expression of preference.
The participant looks, makes a decision, and points to one. Let's say they point to face A.
You consult your internal preferences and you indicate your choice. Simple.
But the researchers are trained in this sleight of hand technique called black on black double card magic.
Which is incredibly hard to spot if you aren't looking for it.
So as the researcher slides the chosen photo across the table to the participant, they covertly swap it with the rejected photo.
They literally hand them the wrong card.
Yes. So the participant points to face A, but the researcher hands them face B. Then the researcher asks the key question, could you explain why you chose this face?
Now, intuition tells you that 100% of people would instantly stop and say, wait, I didn't choose this one. You handed me the wrong card.
Right. It's a massive, immediate visual change in the outcome of a decision they literally just made 3 seconds ago.
But the reveal is that between 75% and 90% of people are completely blind to the mismatch.
It's staggering.
They do not notice the swap at all. They just take the card and look at it.
And this is where the neuroscience gets truly fascinating. Because it's not just that they accept the wrong card.
No, they actively invent detailed, logical reasons for why they quote-unquote chose it.
Which is called confabulation, right?
Yes, it's the storytelling module of our brain working overtime after the fact to make our actions seem coherent.
So practically, a participant might initially point to a woman with dark hair. The researcher swaps the card, hands them a picture of a blonde woman.
And the participant will sit there, look at the blonde woman, and calmly say, well, I chose her because I've always preferred blondes, and I like her smile.
They just generate a post hoc rationalization.
Exactly. The brain's left hemisphere, which houses our language and reasoning centers, acts like an interpreter. Its job is to make sense of what the body is doing.
So the interpreter sees the hand holding the picture.
And says, I am holding this picture, so I must have chosen it. It instantly works backward to fabricate a plausible motive.
Okay, I have to push back here a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
If you're tasting 2 completely different things, like food or drink, there's no way you don't notice a flavor switch. A face on a card is just visual data. Maybe we're just not paying close attention. But are you saying people's taste buds literally lie to them if the outcome is swapped?
That's exactly the skepticism Johansson and Hall wanted to test. They wondered if visual stimuli might be uniquely vulnerable to this trick.
So what did they do?
They took their experiment out of the lab and into a supermarket. They set up a tasting station with 2 distinctly different jams.
Okay.
Let's say one was a very sweet, mild strawberry jam, and the other was a harsh, bitter grapefruit marmalade.
Completely distinct flavor profiles. You couldn't mix them up.
Exactly. Participants tasted both and indicated which one they preferred. The researchers then used a specially designed double-ended jar to covertly swap the jams.
Wait, a double-ended jar?
Yeah, a trick jar. They opened the opposite end, scooped out a second spoonful of the jam the participant had just rejected, and asked them to taste it again and explain why they liked it.
And they still didn't notice.
The vast majority were completely blind to it.
Wow.
They happily swallowed the bitter grapefruit marmalade while explaining in detail that they chose it because they love sweet, sugary strawberry flavors.
That is wild.
The brain's need for internal consistency completely overrode the sensory data coming from their own tongue. The interpreter module just rewrote the narrative on the fly.
But is it possible people did notice, but they were just being polite? I mean, if I'm in a supermarket and a researcher gives me free jam and then hands me the wrong one, I might just play along because I don't want to make a scene.
It's a very valid critique, the idea of social compliance. To rule that out, the researchers ran a computerized version of the test while tracking the participants' pupil dilation.
Why track pupil dilation?
Because it's an autonomic response tied to the locus coeruleus in the brainstem. It's a highly reliable, involuntary physiological measure of surprise or cognitive load.
So you can't fake it.
Exactly. If you notice a switch, even if you consciously decide to keep your mouth shut and play along, your pupils will involuntarily dilate because your brain has detected an error.
A mismatch between expectation and reality.
Right. So what did the eye tracking data show?
Let me guess. No dilation.
In the trials where the swap went undetected by the participant, their pupils did not dilate at all. Absolute zero physiological surprise.
It was true unconscious blindness.
The participants weren't lying to the researchers. Their brains were lying to them.
They also had to rule out the mere exposure effect, right? The idea that maybe if you just stare at the wrong face long enough, you start to like it.
They did. They ran control experiments where they just asked people to rate faces without the deception to ensure that the confabulation they were seeing was a distinct phenomenon, and it is.
So we fabricate reasons for choices we didn't even make. That feels incredibly destabilizing. If I don't know why I chose the jam, do I know why I chose my career? Or my partner?
I know, it sounds scary.
What is the actual, comforting takeaway from this?
The researchers argue that choice blindness drives a wedge between our intentions and our actions. And while that sounds terrifying, clinically, it's actually incredibly liberating.
Liberating how?
It means we are fundamentally flexible creatures. We aren't as rigidly tied to our preferences, our biases, or our past decisions as we think we are.
Oh, I see. We can change.
Exactly. How does that apply in a clinical setting? It's being used as a framework to better understand conditions like obsessive-compulsive disorder.
How so?
In OCD, the brain might be confabulating a sense of danger that isn't actually there, and then forcing the body to perform compulsions to justify that feeling of danger.
Wow, that completely shifts the perspective on compulsions.
It also changes how we view malingering when someone feigns an illness. We're finding that if someone pretends to have certain symptoms long enough, the brain's interpreter might eventually start confabulating reasons for those symptoms.
Tricking the person into experiencing true psychogenic illness.
Right. The overarching lesson is that our self-narrative isn't a documentary, it's a work of fiction that we are constantly editing.
Getting rid of the pressure to be perfectly consistent with your past choices is a huge relief. You are allowed to change your mind because your mind is constantly changing itself anyway.
Beautifully put.
It's just a deeply soothing realization. So our brains are perfectly happy to delete the memory of a choice we just made if the outcome gets swapped. But ironically, our brains hold an absolute iron grip on the tasks that we haven't finished.
Yes. The mind absolutely hates an open loop.
Before we dig into the neuroscience of open loops, just a quick reminder for you listening. If you're enjoying this journey into the hidden mechanics of the mind, please take a moment to like and subscribe.
It really helps us out.
We're exploring the theme of decoding the dark today, and your support helps us keep bringing you these relaxing deep dives. So let's talk about unfinished business.
To understand this obsession with open loops, we actually need to travel back to a bustling cafe in Vienna in the 1920s.
I love how so many foundational psychological discoveries start with someone just people watching in a cafe.
It really was pure observation. A young Russian psychologist named Bluma Zygarnik was having lunch with her professor.
Just sitting there, having coffee?
Right. And Zygarnik was watching the waiters navigate this chaotic environment. She noticed that a single waiter could take orders from a table of 12 people, remember all the complex substitutions.
Who wanted what drink? Who ordered the soup?
Exactly, all without writing a single thing down. They had what appeared to be photographic memories.
But the superpower had a very specific expiration date, didn't it?
It did. Zygarnik noticed that the precise second the food and drinks were placed on the table and the bill was paid, that incredible memory vanished.
Oof.
If she stopped a waiter 5 minutes later and asked, "What did that table over by the window just eat?" the waiter would have absolutely no idea.
The mental file was just completely deleted.
Zygarnik went back to the lab and ran experiments to formalize this observation. She would give participants a series of puzzles or tasks. For half the tasks, she let them finish.
And the other half?
She interrupted them right before they were done. Later, when she asked them to recall the tasks they had worked on, people were twice as likely to remember the tasks they'd been interrupted during.
That is the Zygarnik effect. The human mind organizes itself around goals.
Right.
When a goal is unmet, the mental file stays open, actively consuming working memory. The moment the goal is achieved, the brain sweeps it away to save cognitive resources.
And it explains so much of our modern daily frustration. The feeling of an open loop is almost like a physical itch.
It's the entire reason trivia is so compelling and sometimes so irritating.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if someone asks you, what year was the BBC founded? You might not have cared about the history of British broadcasting a second ago.
Not at all.
But the moment the question is asked, a loop opens. You suddenly need to know that the answer is 1927 just to close the loop and get your cognitive bandwidth back.
Trivia is a minor, kind of fun exploitation of the Zeigarnik effect, but the sources highlight a much more pervasive, almost parasitic example in pop culture.
Tetris, the video game.
Yes, Tetris is perhaps the purest distillation of the Zeigarnik effect ever created.
How so? The sources describe it as a game that hijacks the mind's basic pleasure in getting things done.
Think about the core mechanics of Tetris. Blocks fall, and your goal is to organize them into a solid line.
Right, you're constantly organizing.
When you complete a line, it disappears. You get a tiny hit of dopamine, a closed loop.
So satisfying.
But the very act of placing a piece to clear a line almost always creates new, unfinished, jagged edges on the lines above it.
Oh, wow. You solve one problem, but instantly create 3 new micro-problems.
It is a continuous chain of frustration and partial satisfaction. The game never lets you fully clear the board until you inevitably lose.
The loop never fully closes.
Because it never closes, the brain stays intensely, artificially engaged. This is why people experience what psychologists literally call the Tetris effect.
Where people play for a few hours and then they go to sleep and literally dream of falling geometric blocks.
Exactly. Or they walk down the street, look at the skyline of a city, and their brain automatically tries to mentally rotate the buildings to fit them together.
That sounds exhausting.
The brain has been so heavily primed by these open loops that it continues desperately trying to finish the unfinishable task even when the game is turned off.
Our brain's constantly nagging us about unfinished business, to the point where it alters our visual perception of a city skyline. Is there a way to use this cognitive quirk for good?
Thankfully, yes.
Or are we just doomed to be addicted to video games and stressed out about unread emails forever?
This is where the research takes a profoundly hopeful and healing turn. Scientists have figured out how to weaponize the Tetris effect against one of the most debilitating psychological conditions we experience.
Which is?
Trauma. They developed a treatment called the Imagery Competing Task Intervention, or ICTI.
Okay, let's gently break this down. How on earth does a 1980s puzzle game treat severe trauma?
We have to look at how trauma is encoded in the brain. When someone experiences a traumatic event, the memory often doesn't file away cleanly.
It doesn't close the loop.
Exactly. It stays active as an open loop, manifesting as intrusive, highly visual flashbacks. The brain keeps replaying the terrifying images because it couldn't safely process the event when it happened.
It's the ultimate unfinished task.
Now, according to the Baddeley model of working memory, our brain has a specific subsystem called the visuospatial sketchpad.
Visuospatial sketchpad, okay.
It's the part of the brain that holds and manipulates visual images, and the sketchpad has a very limited capacity.
And Tetris is a highly visual spatial puzzle.
Bingo! Playing Tetris demands a massive amount of cognitive resources from that exact same visuospatial sketchpad. So, researchers theorized, what if we force the brain to compete for those resources?
So if you have someone play Tetris shortly after a traumatic event, or while they're safely recalling a traumatic memory in a clinical setting.
The game literally interrupts the brain's ability to solidify or recall those intrusive images.
That makes so much sense.
The brain cannot simultaneously render the traumatic flashback and calculate where the next Tetris block needs to go.
Because the sketchpad is full.
The visuospatial sketchpad gets overloaded by the game, and because the game requires active problem solving, closing those Zeigarnik loops, the brain prioritizes the game.
That is incredible. And this isn't just theoretical, right? The sources highlight a major clinical trial published recently in the Lancet Psychiatry.
Yes. They tested this intervention on National Health Service frontline healthcare workers in the UK who had been exposed to severe, repeated trauma during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic.
We're talking about nurses and doctors dealing with unprecedented levels of death and crisis.
The statistics from that time are brutal. The sources note that PTSD rates among those frontline workers spiked from a baseline of about 13% up to 25%.
It was an absolute mental health crisis.
It was. So the researchers introduced the ICTI protocol. They had these workers recall their traumatic memories briefly and then immediately play Tetris for about 20 minutes.
And did it work?
The results were staggering. The interventions significantly reduced the frequency and intensity of their intrusive memories. They were able to combat that PTSD spike simply by exploiting the brain's obsession with unfinished blocks.
It's such a beautiful example of hacking a cognitive flaw for profound healing.
It really is.
We take a bug in the software, our inability to let go open loops, and use it to overwrite the worst moments of our lives. It gives you so much hope.
It does. It shows how adaptable we are.
Up until now, we've really been looking at the mind in isolation. We've talked about our personal expectations, our individual choices, and how our own memories are processed.
Right, the internal landscape.
But pop psychology loves to shift the narrative when we start talking about groups.
Oh, definitely. There is a pervasive narrative that while individuals might be rational, humanity as a collective is inherently apathetic, selfish, or outright cruel when left to its own devices.
Which brings us to the dark myths of social psychology. I want to start with what is arguably the ultimate story of urban apathy, the murder of Kitty Genovese.
This case is foundational. It's been taught in almost every introductory psychology and sociology class for over half a century.
It's the bedrock of how we understand crowd behavior.
Or rather, how we misunderstand it.
For those who might not know all the details, the story we are generally told goes like this. In March 1964, in the Kew Gardens neighborhood of Queens, New York, a 28-year-old woman named Catherine Kitty Genovese was coming home from her job as a bar manager late at night.
A terrible, terrible tragedy.
She was attacked and murdered by a man named Winston Moseley. 2 weeks later, the New York Times published a front-page article written by Martin Gansberg.
And this is where the myth begins.
The sensational headline claimed that 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens watched the attack unfold from their apartment windows for over half an hour.
38 people.
And according to the article, not a single person intervened. Not one person went downstairs, and no one even bothered to call the police until Kitty was already dead.
The impact of that article cannot be overstated. It painted a terrifying dystopian picture of modern society.
It suggested that urban life had completely alienated us from one another.
That we had lost our basic humanity. That if you were bleeding on the street, your neighbors would just draw their blinds and go to sleep.
But let's look at the archival reality. Because the soothing truth is, that famous New York Times article was fundamentally a lie.
It was a gross fabrication.
It was a narrative crafted by a police commissioner looking to deflect blame for slow response times, and a journalist who wanted a sensational story.
Decades later, historians, archival researchers, and even Kitty's own brother dug into the actual police records, the court transcripts, and the original witness testimonies.
And the narrative of 38 passive witnesses completely dissolved.
Completely. First of all, there weren't 38 people watching a murder.
Right. The geography of the attack didn't even allow for that.
The attack happened in 2 stages, moving across different areas, including a vestibule where almost no one could see anything.
Most people who heard anything only heard fragmented noises.
And they reasonably assumed it was a drunken lover's quarrel outside a nearby bar, which was common in that neighborhood.
But the most important revelation was that people did act.
Yes, they did.
Kitty Genovese did not die alone on the cold pavement while people ignored her.
No, she didn't. When the attack was happening, a neighbor named Carl Ross did realize something was wrong. But we have to look at the historical context here.
This is so crucial.
Carl Ross was a gay man living in New York in 1964. This was 5 years before the Stonewall riots.
Homosexuality was heavily criminalized.
And police brutality against the LGBTQ community was rampant. Ross was absolutely, legitimately terrified of interacting with the police.
And the original narrative used his hesitation, quoting him as saying he didn't want to get involved, to paint him as a monster of apathy.
Exactly, completely stripping away his justified terror. But despite that intense fear, Ross didn't just go back to bed.
What did he do?
He literally climbed out of his window and crawled across the rooftops of his apartment building to reach a female neighbor's apartment so that she could safely call the police on his behalf.
He took massive physical and social risks to try and get help.
He did. And what about Sophia Farrar?
Yes, Sophia Farrar.
Sophia Farrar was Kitty's friend and neighbor. The moment she realized what was happening, she didn't hesitate. She rushed out of her apartment, ran down the stairs and into the hallway where Kitty had crawled.
She held Kitty in her arms, comforting her as she passed away.
The idea that no one cared is a deep insult to the people who risked their lives that night.
And there's an ultimate irony to the whole story regarding how the killer, Winston Moseley, was eventually caught.
Oh, this part is amazing. Moseley wasn't caught through brilliant detective work. A few days after murdering Kitty, he was attempting a burglary in another neighborhood.
And who caught him?
Bystanders. He was caught because bystanders saw him trying to steal a television, intervened, disabled his vehicle so he couldn't escape, and called the cops.
Ordinary bystanders literally stopped the killer.
The real story of Kitty Genovese is a story of intervention and community, surrounded by a terrible tragedy.
But the damage from the false newspaper report was already done.
It was. It sparked a panic in the psychological community.
It directly inspired psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latané to try and figure out why crowds make us apathetic.
They created the theory of diffusion of responsibility, which is universally known today as the bystander effect.
Darley and Latané set up these famous laboratory experiments to prove that the more people are present in an emergency, the less likely anyone is to help.
Let's look at their classic seizure study.
Okay, walk us through it.
They bring a university student into a lab, put them in a room alone, and give them a headset. They tell the student they are going to have a conversation about college life with other students over the intercom system.
It's all pre-recorded, of course.
Suddenly, one of the voices on the headset starts stammering, faking a seizure, choking, and explicitly asking for help before going silent.
That sounds terrifying for the participant.
And the results they published seemed to completely validate the dark view of humanity. When participants thought they were the only one on the intercom, 85% of them rushed out of the room to find help.
But when the researchers told the participant that 4 other students were also listening on the line, only 31% went to help.
The conclusion drawn was that responsibility diffuses. If you think 4 other people are there, your brain subconsciously divides the responsibility by 5.
You assume someone else will handle it, so nobody handles it.
Yeah.
Look, I get that the Kitty Genovese story was exaggerated, but diffusion of responsibility feels incredibly real.
It does feel real in certain contexts.
Anyone who has ever been in a corporate email chain where someone asks a general question and no one replies because everyone assumes someone else will do it knows this feeling.
The classic email chain silence.
Or a group project at school where one person slacks off. Doesn't the Darley and Latané experiment capture a very real, very frustrating human flaw?
It captures how humans process ambiguous, low-stakes, or highly artificial situations. The feeling you're describing in an email chain is completely valid. But the flaw was applying that email chain logic to life-or-death emergencies.
Oh, I see.
In the lab, the participants are in a safe university building, listening to a voice over a headset. They can't see the victim, they can't see the other bystanders.
And there is an implicit assumption that the researchers running the study are ultimately in charge and monitoring everything.
Exactly. It's an environment stripped of natural human cues.
So what happens when you take this theory out of the lab and put it back onto the actual streets?
It completely falls apart. This brings us to a monumental paradigm shift in psychology. The CCTV study conducted by Richard Philpott and his team.
CCTV, like security cameras.
Right. They realized that you can't ethically stage a violent mugging to see how people react, but because of modern surveillance, you don't have to. We have cameras everywhere.
They analyzed real-world footage.
They analyzed 219 separate surveillance videos capturing real, violent, unscripted public conflicts in the United Kingdom, South Africa, and the Netherlands.
These weren't actors faking a seizure.
These were real fights, muggings, and assaults.
And what did the footage show? Did people just walk by?
They found the exact opposite of the bystander effect. In 90% of the conflicts, 9 out of 10 times bystanders actively intervened to provide help.
Wow. 9 out of 10.
They de-escalated the fight, pulled the attacker away, or comforted the victim. On average, there were nearly 4 interveners per single incident.
Wait, so the presence of a crowd didn't stop people from helping?
Far from it. Philpott's data showed that the more bystanders were present at the scene, the higher the chance that someone would step in.
That is amazing.
In the real world, when the danger is physical and undeniable, we rely on numbers. If there are 10 people watching, someone will make eye contact, signal for help, and a group will intervene together.
Human beings are deeply, inherently pro-social. We evolved to protect the tribe.
The idea that a crowd makes us fatally apathetic is a myth born from bad journalism and perpetuated by confusing laboratory setups.
That is just wonderful to hear. It's so deeply relaxing to know that people will be there for you.
It really restores your faith in humanity.
But discovering that we are pro-social in emergencies invites a much bigger question. If we were lied to about urban apathy, what about the experiments that supposedly proved our inherent cruelty?
Right.
I want to turn a critical eye to the two most infamous psychological experiments of the 20th century.
The Milgram shock experiment and the Stanford prison experiment.
Let's start with Stanley Milgram. We need to set the historical scene here because the context is everything. It's the early 1960s at Yale University.
The cultural context is vital here.
The trial of the Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann has just concluded in Jerusalem. The philosopher Hannah Arendt has just coined the phrase, the banality of evil.
The entire world is grappling with this terrifying question. How could ordinary, seemingly decent citizens participate in the Holocaust?
Was it a unique cultural sickness? Or is there a dormant Nazi inside everyone just waiting for orders?
That was the existential question Milgram set out to answer. He wanted to test the limits of obedience to authority.
The setup is chillingly brilliant. A volunteer from the community arrives at the Yale lab. They were introduced to another man who they believe is just another volunteer.
But is actually an actor working for Milgram.
Right. A man in a stern gray lab coat, the authority figure, explains that they are testing the effects of punishment on learning.
The real volunteer is assigned the role of teacher, and the actor is strapped into a chair in the next room and designated the learner.
The teacher sits in front of a massive shock generator. It has switches ranging from 15 volts all the way up to 450 volts, which is ominously labeled danger, severe shock.
The teacher reads word pairs over a microphone. Every time the learner gets a question wrong, the teacher must flip a switch and administer a shock, moving one level higher each time.
As the voltage increases, the actor in the next room starts reacting. At 75 volts, he grunts. At 150 volts, he demands to be let out.
At 270 volts, it's an agonizing scream.
At 330 volts, he complains of a heart condition and begs for his life. And eventually, silence.
The implication being that he is either unconscious or dead.
And the terrifying statistic that Milgram published, the number that shocked the world, was that 65% of normal, everyday people flipped every single switch.
They went all the way to 450 volts, supposedly torturing a stranger to death simply because the man in the lab coat told them to.
The conclusion was that human beings are fundamentally mechanical, that our moral compass completely shuts down the moment a legitimate authority figure issues a command.
It's a narrative of blind, thoughtless obedience.
But just like the Kitty Genovese story, recent archival reassessments have completely shattered this scientific veneer.
Yes, the truth is very different.
What did researchers find when they finally went back to the Yale archives?
Researchers like David Capozzi and David Sumegi, building on the work of historian Gina Perry, decided to actually listen to the raw data.
The unedited tapes.
They analyzed 136 original audio recordings of the experiments, and what they heard on those tapes completely destroys Milgram's narrative.
What were they listening for?
They were looking for procedural integrity. Milgram claimed his experiment was highly standardized to ensure scientific validity.
So treating every participant the exact same way.
Exactly. The experimenter in the room, a man named John Williams, was only supposed to use 4 specific scripted prods if the teacher hesitated.
Like what?
He could say things like, "Please continue," or "The experiment requires that you continue," and finally, "You have no other choice, you must go on."
And if a teacher still refused?
If the teacher refused after the 4th prod, the experiment was over. That was the strict rule.
But the tapes showed something different.
The tapes revealed a total procedural collapse.
Wow.
The experimenter did not stick to the script. When participants balked, argued, and refused to shock the learner, the experimenter actively coerced them. He argued with them.
He bullied them.
He bullied them. He engaged in prolonged negotiations.
So they weren't just passively obeying an order.
Not at all. Many participants actively resisted. They tried to give the money back. They physically tried to leave the room.
But the experimenter stopped them.
The experimenter would block them verbally, inventing new, highly aggressive commands on the fly that weren't in the protocol. He would assure them he took all legal responsibility.
Essentially acting as an accomplice rather
Yeah.
than a neutral scientist.
Exactly. It wasn't an elegant demonstration of blind obedience. It was an extended, high-pressure negotiation where the researchers broke their own strict scientific rules just to force compliance.
They just wanted to get the horrifying result they wanted to publish.
It fundamentally changes the takeaway. They didn't blindly obey, they were worn down by an aggressive interrogator.
Which brings us to an even more theatrical and frankly fraudulent study, the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Conducted by Philip Zimbardo in 1971. If Milgram was about obeying orders, Zimbardo's experiment was about the power of roles.
Zimbardo recruits a group of psychologically healthy, normal college students and randomly assigns them to be either guards or prisoners in a mock prison built in the basement of the Stanford Psychology Building.
Right.
The story we are all told, the one in every textbook and movie, is that within days, the normal students assigned to be guards spontaneously transformed into sadistic monsters.
They inflicted such severe psychological abuse on the prisoners that Zimbardo had to halt a 2-week study after just 6 days.
The takeaway was the bad barrel theory.
Yes. It suggested that institutions and roles automatically poison human nature. If you put a good person in a position of unchecked power, they will inherently become abusive without anyone telling them to.
Wait, if Milgram was flawed because the experimenter was badgering the participant, the Stanford experiment is different, right?
How so?
Well, there was no authority figure standing over the student guards ordering them to force the prisoners to do push-ups or clean toilets with their bare hands. The students invented that cruelty completely on their own, didn't they?
That is precisely the myth Zimbardo sold to the public for 50 years, but it isn't true.
It's not.
No. A French researcher named Thibault Letexier, digging into the Stanford archives and interviewing the participants, uncovered a massive methodological fabrication. The guards did not invent the cruelty.
Where did it come from?
They were actively coached, directed, and pressured by the research team to be cruel.
Wait, the researchers told them what to do?
Yes. Zimbardo appointed one of his undergraduate research assistants, David Jaffe, to act as the warden. We now have audio recordings of the orientation meetings before the study even began.
What's on the tapes?
The researchers explicitly instructed the guards to act tough, to strip the prisoners of their individuality, and to actively create a hostile, oppressive environment.
They gave them instructions on how to dehumanize the prisoners.
They did. They told the guards to refer to prisoners only by ID numbers, never by their names. They issued the guards mirrored sunglasses specifically to prevent eye contact and strip away their humanity.
And what if the guards didn't want to?
When some of the guards didn't want to be mean, the warden pulled them aside and told them they were ruining the experiment and that they needed to step up the abuse for the sake of science.
It was directed theater.
It was an amateur theatrical performance directed by the researchers to confirm a conclusion they had largely written before the first student even walked into that basement.
That is unbelievable.
And the rabbit hole goes deeper.
How much deeper?
Zimbardo consulted with an ex-convict named Carlo Prescott, who had served time in San Quentin. Prescott later wrote an article detailing how he actually supplied the specific, degrading tactics to the researchers beforehand.
So the abuse was scripted.
Putting bags over the prisoners' heads, disrupting their stomach cycles, forcing them to use buckets for toilets, these weren't spontaneous inventions by college students.
They were specific abuses Prescott had experienced in San Quentin.
Which he fed to the researchers, who then fed them to the student guards as a script to act out.
So the students were just following a pre-written script of prison abuse. And beyond the coaching, wasn't there a massive issue with who even volunteered for the study?
Severe selection bias. The newspaper advertisement Zimbardo placed specifically asked for male college students for psychological study of prison life.
What's wrong with that?
Decades later, psychologists Thomas Carnahan and Sam McFarland ran an experiment where they placed that exact same ad and compared the respondents to a generic ad for a psychological study.
Yeah.
They found that the phrase prison life disproportionately attracted individuals who scored significantly higher on traits like authoritarianism, Machiavellianism, and social dominance, and lower on empathy.
So Zimbardo didn't recruit normal, average students. He inadvertently recruited a subset of aggressive personalities, handed them a script of abuse, coached them on how to perform it, and then acted shocked when they followed his directions.
The entire scientific validity of the study evaporates. It is a masterclass in how not to do science.
But it succeeded as a media spectacle.
It really did.
It really is astonishing how these dark myths endure. And it leads to a really troubling pattern.
What's that?
When authorities and researchers design flawed systems and things go predictably wrong, they rarely take responsibility. Instead, they pathologize the victims to deflect blame.
Yes.
And this brings us to a wildly famous syndrome that, shockingly, doesn't actually exist in any psychiatric diagnostic manual.
You're referring to Stockholm Syndrome.
Let's set the scene for this one.
Yeah.
The year is 1973. We are in Stockholm, Sweden. A convict on parole named Jan-Erik Olsson walks into the credit bank, pulls out a submachine gun, and attempts a bank robbery.
Things immediately go wrong, the police arrive, and a shootout ensues.
Olsson retreats into the bank vault and takes 4 bank employees hostage.
He then demands that his friend, another notorious criminal named Clark Olofsson, be brought from prison to join him in the vault.
The police agree, and for 6 agonizing days, Olsson and Olofsson hold the 4 hostages in that vault while negotiating with the government.
The entire country of Sweden and much of the world watched this standoff unfold on live television.
And when the hostages were finally released, the public was completely baffled by their behavior.
Baffled and scandalized, because the victims, especially a 23-year-old woman named Kristen Enmark, emerged from the vault seemingly defending their captors.
Right. They refused to testify against them in court, they raised money for their legal defense, and Kristen Enmark seemed to actively hate the police.
She was highly critical of how the authorities handled the situation.
And this is where the criminologist and psychiatrist Nils Bejerot enters the historical narrative.
Bejerot was consulting for the police during the standoff. He was the one advising them on tactics.
After the standoff ended, he went on television and coined the term Stockholm Syndrome to explain the hostages' behavior.
He described it as a brainwashed, pathological state where captives irrationally bond with their captors out of trauma.
Well, wait, how much time did Bejerot actually spend evaluating the hostages before diagnosing them on national television?
None. He never met them. He never interviewed Kristen Enmark or any of the others. He diagnosed them from afar entirely through the media.
Why would a medical professional do that?
Because if you dig into the actual historical record of those 6 days inside the vault, the incompetence of the police that Bejerot was advising, was absolutely staggering.
So they needed a scapegoat.
Exactly. The hostages weren't brainwashed. They were furious at the authorities for almost getting them killed multiple times.
Give me an example of the police incompetence.
At one point, Kristen Enmark actually managed to get on the phone with the Swedish Prime Minister, Olof Palme.
What did she say?
She begged him to let the robbers and the hostages leave together in a getaway car, guaranteeing they wouldn't be hurt. Palme coldly told her that the government would not negotiate, effectively telling a 23-year-old woman that her life was an acceptable political loss.
So the government abandons them. What did the police on the ground do?
The police continually provoked the robbers. At one point, they sent in a 16-year-old boy to negotiate, which almost caused a firefight.
That's incredibly reckless.
But the most damning evidence is the tear gas incident. The police decided their best tactical move was to drill holes in the roof of the vault and pump in tear gas to incapacitate the robbers.
Pumping tear gas into an enclosed vault sounds incredibly dangerous, but maybe they thought it was standard procedure.
It would have been, except for one detail. Jan-Erik Olsson had placed nooses slip knots around the necks of the hostages and tied the ropes to the safety deposit boxes.
Oh my.
Exactly. If the gas was pumped in and the hostages collapsed from the fumes, they would have strangled to death on the ropes.
Did the police know about the ropes?
The police knew the ropes were there, they could see them through the drill holes, and they planned to pump the gas in anyway.
So when people today point to Patty Hearst joining her captors to rob banks, or when hostages seem to bond with the people holding guns to their heads, you're saying it's not some pathological brainwashing. What is it then?
It is a highly calculated, deeply rational survival strategy.
A survival strategy.
Modern researchers, like journalist Jess Hill, who studies coercive control, and Alan Wade, who studies victim resistance, point out that labeling this a syndrome is not only scientifically baseless, but heavily riddled with misogyny.
Because it blames the victim.
It shifts the focus entirely away from the institutional failure of the police and places the burden of pathology onto the victim.
Kristen Enmark realized very quickly that the men with the guns were acting rationally. They just wanted to escape. Meanwhile, the police outside were acting recklessly and actively endangering her life to prove a political point.
She aligned with the people who were actually keeping her alive in that vault. The robbers gave her a jacket when she was cold. The police tried to gas her.
It's just horrific.
Inventing Stockholm Syndrome was Nils Bejerot's convenient, highly televised way to silence a young woman who was rightfully speaking out against the authorities who failed her.
It literally pathologizes the brilliant psychological tactics victims use to survive horrific situations.
It does. It robs them of their agency.
That is just, wow. It really forces you to reconsider every time you hear someone casually use that term.
It's a completely different paradigm.
Let's take a moment to gently synthesize the journey we've been on today, because we've covered a lot of ground.
We really have.
We started by looking inward at the architecture of our own minds. We learned that our reality is incredibly malleable. It's shaped by the expectations of others through the Pygmalion effect.
And our daily moods are tricked by the hyperfocus of our own attention.
We saw how easily our brains construct false narratives, confabulating reasons for choices we never actually made, simply to maintain a cohesive sense of self.
We learned how our brains hold a relentless grip on unfinished business through the Zeigarnik effect.
A quirk that makes puzzle games irresistible, but can also be beautifully harnessed through targeted interventions to heal severe trauma.
But I think the most profound, most important takeaway today is what happened when we looked outward.
Absolutely. When we re-examine the darkest myths of human behavior, our supposed apathy as bystanders in the Kitty Genevieve's case,
Our blind, mechanical cruelty to authority in the Milgram experiments.
the inevitability of abuse in the Stanford prison, and our supposed psychological weakness in the face of captivity, we found that the darkness was largely a fabrication.
The truth hidden in the archives is so much more comforting than the myths we were sold. Humanity is profoundly resilient.
We are deeply pro-social creatures. We step in to help strangers in danger. We actively resist unjust authority when we aren't being systematically bullied and coerced by flawed systems.
And when faced with unimaginable terror, we are incredibly rational survivors.
Which leaves us with a profound, calming thought to mull over as we end our time together today.
Yes, if so many of the darkest truths about human nature were actually just theatrical illusions created by flawed systems, what beliefs about your own limitations are you holding on to right now that might just be a trick of the light?
That is a beautiful question to carry with you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found some clarity and comfort in untangling the muddy waters of the mind.
It's been a pleasure.
Remember, decoding the dark is not about finding the monsters hiding in human nature. It's about turning on the light, looking at the raw data, and realizing there was never a monster there to begin with.
Well said.
Please like, subscribe, and share this soothing exploration of the human mind with someone you care about. We'll be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, take care.